Melissa Sims, is using RICO statutes, which are usually used to go after organized crime, to sue ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron, BP, all the global fossil fuel companies for harming the planet. That's been a really interesting development in terms of using unique and creative legal strategies to go after these polluters.
Their collusion started in the 50s when they earnestly studied carbon in the atmosphere. They even funded the Keeling curve that detects carbon in the atmosphere. And in 1979, an intern at Exxon named Steve Kinsley was asked to put all those studies together and come up with a white paper. And the fascinating part of this white paper is it shows how much carbon is in the atmosphere today. So they knew with pinpoint accuracy what the effect of the carbon in the atmosphere was going to be. But instead of gathering this information and deciding to take the crossroads towards global health, they decided to take the crossroad towards profits in their pocket. In 1998, they come up with the Victory Memo, a division of labor among who was going to be the promoters, what they were going to say, and how they were going to change the world into believing that climate change wasn't real when they knew that it was. So they had particularized individual knowledge as to what the effect of climate change was going to be, and that it was going to disproportionately affect people throughout the globe. And instead of doing something about it, they chose, and I think Shell coined it in a 1998 memo, TINA, there is no alternative. That meant we can't go back. So they chose that crossroads after having this knowledge, and they decided to sell their consumer products, and they colluded together to deceive the world into believing climate change was not a real existential threat. They admit now climate change is real. When I run across people who don't believe in climate change, the first thing I say back to them is say, well, Exxon agrees that it's real. All of the CEOs of, the fossil fuel industry admits that climate change is real and is a threat. So to me, though, what's going to be very important, and it's not really challenging, is finding out who is funding these climate deniers. Who is actually giving them the money? Where is this dark money coming from that we can trace to these climate deniers? Because if you're in the business of selling a consumer product, which oil and gas is, if you're in the business of selling a consumer product, you cannot use a promoter to say something that you know is untrue. And so is there a material funding of those promoters? And if we look at the Victory Memo, that's what the Victory Memo said, is how they were going to get funders to go after trying to undermine what they knew was real about climate change. And then also who ordered all that, and is it still going on? Because we still see outliers saying, oh, climate change isn't real, the earth is still flat, but who's funding that? So that's what's really going to be at the core of our case, is who funded this climate denial campaign, and is it still being funded while they're admitting that climate change is real? Before I joined Milberg, I was an attorney in a small town, general practice of law, with my boss who was in his 80s. So the two of us represented municipalities. One of the towns we represented was the village of Depew. And what I've learned from my work now is that most of the people who are the victims of pollution are communities of color, throughout the world, right? And they're the ones who are disproportionately affected also by climate change. But one of the towns we represented was the village of Depew, and we have a very high undocumented worker population in that town. Exxon, CBS, and Viacom had made film for the film industry, and in the 80s, when everything went digital, they left town, and we had bright blue mud puddles all over town. We had one of the highest MS rate in the country, multiple sclerosis, and nobody cared. Nobody cared. If this was in a white community, it would be cleaned up. And that was kind of like an eye opener for me. And I remember the mayor leaned over to me and he said, Missy, what can we do? And I said, we're going to sue him. And he said, can we? I said, I don't know. I find people every day for dog poop in their yard, tall weeds, broken windows. Why can't I find Exxon, CBS, and Viacom? So me and my 90-year-old boss took Exxon to traffic court, and we fined them for littering for something they did 60 years ago. Because in Illinois, there's no statute of limitations against municipalities. It's called nullum tempus occurret regi. And it means literally no time runs against the king. So I had all this municipal
And was that a successful lawsuit against
Well, they dismissed us. We went to Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, and for the first time, though, the Seventh Circuit ruled that there was no preemption. Everyone had assumed there was preemption. Everyone had assumed that a unit of local government could not take on big corporations for something that was going on, like a nuisance. And it really turned the nuisance world on its head because after the Seventh Circuit ruled, I had all these big plaintiff firms say, how did you do that? Like, what happened there? Like, how did you get rid of preemption? And so then it was after that that I was asked to sue Shell and ConocoPhillips for benzene pollution in Southern Illinois in a little town called Roxana. I used the same ordinance scheme and we fined them for benzene. Again, we won a motion to dismiss on that, settled that case. Every night before I went to bed, my mother would say, what did you do to help other people today? Right? So it's part of ingrained in your sinus rhythm as to finding ways to right wrongs. And that's part of what I do now is I look to see who is affected by this. And 9 times out of 10, it's a community of color. And so then I try to find innovative ways to get around certain laws that are on the books to try to get them some compensation or just get it cleaned up.